In our recent video, we explored the growing influence of BRICS, focusing on how these nations are leveraging media as a tool of soft power to reshape global narratives. BRICS, particularly through media and communication, is positioning itself to challenge the Western-dominated information landscape. As discussed, journalism and cultural values play a pivotal role in shaping international public opinion, with media from BRICS nations working towards a more balanced global narrative. Today we'll be diving deeper into the concept of information warfare and economic warfare in this shifting geopolitical landscape. The Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, clarified the position of India as well as raised the collective voice of the Global South, saying that this is not an era of war. However, on deeper introspection, it is evident that it is not an era of kinetic warfare, but an era of information warfare and economic warfare. While Prime Minister Modi emphasizes that this is not an era of traditional warfare, it becomes clear that the battles have shifted to new fronts, namely information and economic domains. The economic warfare is clearly visible in how the United States of America and its Western allies rely on the power of the dollar, the soon-to-be-gone global reserve currency status, to pressure the BRICS plus nations and the Global South. A lot has been said and insinuated about the BRICS, predominantly by low-quality experts propped up by social media algorithms. Citizens from the BRICS plus nations and the Global South are continuously fed the nonsense under the pretext of expert analysis. A food for thought to all these ordinary folks from across the world who tune into these experts. How many of these experts have relied on the US dollar reserve currency status to make a livelihood in the past? And how many continue to rely on it even today? If either one of these conditions holds true, then why would they support a move to a multipolar world where hegemonic structures are irrelevant? Are their analysis honest, genuine, and unbiased? If not, can we as people stop treating it as such? With that being said, as ordinary citizens sharing this planet, let us try to build a multilateral thinking process while the real leaders of the Global South work towards building a multipolar world. Let us not be tethered to the unipolar mindset and continue to be victims of information warfare, where rants and rambles of American podcasters and their ill-informed guests tell you what is happening around the world and how you should think and react to it. Joining us to provide expert insights on this complex topic is Dr. Ankit Shah, an esteemed expert in international relations and global economics. Dr. Shah will help us unpack how these geopolitical strategies are unfolding and what they mean for the future of global cooperation.
Hi everyone, welcome to BRICS Briefs. Today we are talking about fake news, a very topical and sinister subject. The recent target of lies, half-truths and espionage is India. As you may know, the EU Commission recently passed laws to criminalise free speech, and this attack on a well-established fundamental human right is occurring all over the world as we go into overt, mainstream justified hot wars. This is exactly the same as occurred leading into World War II. We need an exceptional person to help us with this analysis of the lies concerning India, so we have with us Dr. Shah. Dr. Shah is a chartered accountant, a qualified company secretary, and serves in the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, as an academic and research associate. He has a keen eye on the foreign policy affairs for the Indian subcontinent and is a well-reputed scholar among the Indian intellectual communities. Let's bring him on. Welcome, Dr. Shah.
Namaste. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. So, fake news. This is very topical. So, we'll get straight into it. So, I want to put this to you first, Dr. Shah. Western media, experts, analysts are trying to create a divide between BRICS and the citizens of BRICS nations, with reports like India selling weapons to Ukraine or the India-China war. But the reality on the ground is completely different. How do you address this issue? How do you foresee it in the days to come with Kazan summit and US elections? The disinfo will definitely increase. How to counter that?
So, well, Clive, I've been observing the Indian media landscape for the last 2.5 to 3 years. And I've been consistently being an exception, warning the intellectual committee, the community in the country, that all the headlines, I mean, almost 99% of the media headlines seem to be lopsided or simply cut, copy, pasted from the Western sources. Now, what happens when you are not able to put in real journalistic efforts and simply copy paste a lot of headlines which are propaganda machinery funded from the Western or vested interest, which are linked to creating spats between nations, especially your neighbors. That is what you seem to be a long-term kind of an objective of this kind of narrative warfare. So India has been subjected to this for far too long, and thanks to me, people like me, who are trying to alert the masses that no, these all headlines are fake, because people in their routine job roles, they do not have time to read the whole article or even deep dive into what actually is happening on ground. So they just rush to the headlines and make opinions themselves about it. And this has been a problem with even with the experts community, who do realize that some kind of narrative warfare is going on from external sources, but even they are unable to catch that most of these headlines are concocted ones and fake. Now, in the last 2 to 2.5 years, I've seen a lot of propaganda that has happened against two big institutions. One is BRICS and second is SEO. Now, both of these were laughed at. I mean, even in the expert community, in the intellectual groups, you will find people laughing on both of these groups and even rejecting to the extent saying that these are China-dominated bodies. India is just there to posturing, and there is no such important role. None of these bodies can actually churn out any kind of serious outcome and stuff like that. And I used to resist those with valid arguments, saying, I mean, if China is dominating those bodies, tell me one right which the Chinese country has, which is extra to what Indian membership or a Russian membership has in those groups. And they just don't have any answer. So last 2 years, I'm seeing this propaganda that if Pakistan joins BRICS, India should move out, or some Chinese expert has said that India should be thrown out of SEO. These are the kind of headlines we continuously, hammered onto the masses. We are being told that, nothing that BRICS or SEO can turn out anything positive for the Indian subcontinent or in the region in terms of trade and stuff like that. You'll see headlines like, India-China will be soon having a full-scale war at the LAC standoff, which is ongoing. And then they would continuously, put in offers of Western arms and ammunitions. Buy this aircraft, this is better, stuff like that. And I'm not surprised, Clive, about this, because one of the critical information which I was going through during when I was reading some of the stuff on Second World War, there was a summit during the Second World War between the three leaders. Who are these three leaders? This was President Roosevelt of United States. This was President Stalin of USSR, and Mr. Churchill from UK. And before the summit begins, what is the discussion that goes on between Stalin and Roosevelt? The US president gives an offer to President Stalin saying the area of Indochina. Now, those days, Indochina was the term which was utilized for Southeast Asia countries. So the first offer was these countries should not go to France after the war. Okay, that was the first point of discussion. The second offer to Stalin was, let us not discuss the question of India with Mr. Churchill. Now, we all know and understand that we were a British colony. So the US president is offering the Russian president and telling him, let us not discuss India with Mr. Churchill, you can have it. Meaning the Soviets are free to impose a socialist governance within India. This is the offer which the US president gives to the Russian president. Now, in India, for last 60, 70 years, the kind of socialist governance which we had in terms of, for posturing, it was non-alignment and stuff like that after independence. But in terms of governance, the entire syllabus, the curriculum, the education system was completely leftist. The governance was leftist to the extent there was something called license Raj, which means private businessmen or innovators would get no opportunity to conduct any kind of business. And then it was completely a Babu-led or a state-led governance where innovation or private sector had no role much to play for development or growth. So, and then when we achieved a very less percentage of growth, this was labeled by the Western agencies as Hindu rate of growth to criticize us.
Wow.
So just few days back, when I was looking at our foreign minister's discussions with the Western media, and he was trying to explain how Pakistan was armed despite being a dictatorship, and we had to go for Russian arms, I was feeling like, where is the need to even explain that we were buying Russian arms, because we were handed over to the Soviets by the US president. So this is a very critical piece of information. Now, why were we handed over to the Soviets? Okay, why did they wanted the world to split into two parts? They wanted the world to be split into two parts, communist and capitalist, so that they can run the war economy and keep the pound and US dollar in their reserve currency status. So one bucket of nations gets dollars and arms, the second bucket of nations gets sanctioned. And you continuously clash with your neighbor, and that is how the US dollar continues in the reserve currency status. So in countries where there was no animosity with your neighbor, they created an artificial line and created nations. We were unfortunately one of those. So a line was drawn of partition and Pakistan was created just to keep the US dollar going in the reserve currency status. Do you understand?
Wow.
Similarly, a line was drawn at the China border, and as you see, the dispute is still on. So in the entire world, I mean, you just imagine the kind of brain that has gone into making this formula of continuous clashes happening between the two worlds, two groupings, and then, able to continue your reserve currency status and exploiting that dominance. So you imagine Europe standing at Russian borders, Russia standing at Chinese borders, China standing at Indian borders, India standing at Pakistan borders, Pakistan standing at Afghanistan borders, Afghanistan standing at Iran borders, Iran standing at Iraq borders, Israel standing at Iran borders, right? So in the whole world, they created this two bucket theory. You're being told that your neighbor is a rogue country, you will get arms and dollars, and your neighbor gets sanctioned. And you continuously clash, buy the arms, and keep the US dollar going in the reserve currency status. So I am not surprised when I came over to that critical piece of information that it was the US president himself handing over India, which was the crown jewel of the British India, to the Soviet Union, and saying that you can have your kind of influence in the governance in the British India. And they armed Pakistan against us, and the number of wars that we had.
Yes. Yeah, it's well documented. Yeah. So this, when you say this two bucket theory and you outlined, those demarcation, the countries. So someone is saying this, right? There's a third party saying this. Who do you think that is? I'm sort of going off a little bit from, but who do you think that is that's saying, who's that third party saying that country is your enemy?
It is the Western nations.
The West, yeah.
Right? Because you got to understand that until the Second World War, it was pound which was in the single country reserve currency status. So how the US turned dollar into the reserve currency status? By collecting gold. So in the Second World War, United States said, that I'm going to do the war supplies to the European allies, and in terms of payment, I don't want currency, I want gold. So once US collected all the physical gold from the European allies and ensured that Britain was decimated with the impact of the Second World War, it imposed US dollar as the new reserve currency of the world. So I'm not surprised the issue of Israel also created around the same time, Israel versus Palestine. Similarly, the Chinese got independence also around the same time. So this is how they created two buckets everywhere, all around the world. So they did coerce Britain into doing partitions in a way where animosity did not exist with your neighbor. They used Britain to create an artificial line of partition across the world, because dollar had just become the new reserve currency, and they understood this idea that countries need to continuously clash. Otherwise, a healthy economic country will certainly start thinking on the process of de-dollarization. So the healthy country needs to be continuously pinpricked by the neighbor, so as to keep the growth down and the conflict boiling. That is how the reserve currency status could be maintained, which is why I believe that this idea was adopted. And this is exactly what I've put up complete details in my geopolitics book, making it clear that how this thing worked. You can in all regions you can easily make out. At one point in time, with reference to a date, you will come to know that they will announce an aid for Palestine. After a few months, they will sell arms to Israel. Right? So
that's crazy. That's great. Well, I mean, and to come back to my original question, which I don't think it's very fair, but we still want to propose it to someone such as you, who is an expert, and the audience hears what you think. But how do we actually counter them? Because as I said, they're making laws here in Australia. They're bringing in the laws. It's rushed to make misinformation disinformation, right? And basically they're going to make the social media companies, because that's the main issue. They're going to make social media companies censor us, censor you. So this most likely shows like this will be censored. You can still put it up, but it's not going to be seen. How do you think we counter this? Lawfare?
Well, Clive, we got to understand one thing, that the whole concept of internet was born from the US defense system. It was born out of the defense system. So it is no surprise that the entire big tech role that it has assumed today, it has become a state within a state in all countries. And you can see how they can do election interference by tweaking the algorithms of this media platforms and stuff like that. So I do believe that the only solution the world has is the BRICS nations will have to make their own indigenous platforms. The data centers and the storage has to be within the countries, or you're going to buy these companies or have some stake in it, or they become a Indian company or a Russian company or a Chinese company, stuff like that. So I was not surprised a few weeks back when Telegram CEO was arrested in France, because that was the only platform which was having a considerable base and completely out of control of the Western elite. So I'm not surprised that he was detained in France, because they could see that this is the only platform which is not in their control. Now, we got to understand that eventually it is a kind of what we call in India as Atmanirbhar Bharat. So you have to work on your own tech innovation, make your own platforms, and be self-independent in terms of this kind of tools of communication and media. You cannot rely any more longer on them, because they are open to do mischief during your elections and stuff like that.
Yeah. So really, there's an opportunity here in this crisis we actually have an opportunity to make our own and defend it. Obviously, we still have to defend it. That's interesting. I'm glad you've put that on the table in this discussion and made it very clear, because I just want to make sure our audience understands, when we ask an expert like Dr. Shah, that's the whole point. Otherwise it would just me and the producer, we could sit down and we could talk like there are a lot of podcasts. So hopefully people are listening and they take what you're saying in due consideration when they make decisions. But let me get to the next question. We have seen propaganda warfare.
I just have to add one thing. I have to add one thing, and that is I'm very glad with the way Russia is conducting BRICS summit this time, because for the first time we are seeing so many events that are going to happen within Russia in multiple domains, be it education, be it media, be it technology, be it medicine, be it language, be it culture, be it food, be it fashion. So this is the first time I'm seeing Russia opening up so much, because, and why is this happening is because we are moving into a world where the Western currencies are going to lose their purchasing power. So countries do realize that regional integration is the only way forward to come out of Western standardization, which was actually imposed so that you use your own natural resources, you pollute your own countries, make goods for them, they just print the currency and buy it out. So as we are moving out of this stuff, and as countries realize it more and more that this is a big kind of a fraud, regional integration is the only way forward. And this is exactly what our foreign minister Jaishankar ji also talks about, that regionalism is the only way forward. And I'll be more than glad to see that the BRICS nations start working on different stuff like the BRICS media, or we call as a common minimum program for recognizing each other's education certification, okay, people to people ties, okay, more of investment and trade across the borders, because you got to understand that another critical piece of information which viewers should know, it is the PhD thesis of Secretary Antony Blinken of 1988, which says there has to be a huge wall between Europe and Russia to serve the American interests. Okay. Now, if we go by this thought process, what that means is a lot of Russian, natural resources, oil, gas, whatever, are not going to go towards Europe. And if that is going to be the case, the only way the BRICS nations can boom their economy and stuff like that is, regional integration with the Asian countries and Central Asia. Okay. So I do see that once the Ukraine conflict gets resolved, I believe the West will still not allow access of cheaper Russian energy to the Western European nations, because, as you know, they have a NATO grouping, and you can see how Europe is being deindustrialized with this conflict. Volkswagen, which is a big brand, has announced about 15,000 layoffs. And now we are hearing that they will have to rely on some Indian joint venture for sustaining their business. So eventually we are seeing that because businesses will run where the profits take them, right? They are going to escape. So as we see, so as we see the deindustrialization of Europe happening more and more as the conflict stretches, most of these Western companies are going to reshore their business operations either to Bharat or China or the Russian or the Asian countries. So I do see this kind of positives coming out after the challenging time.
Yeah, and that sort of leads into what I want to ask you next, which is, we have seen propaganda warfare by the West against Russia and China, specifically targeting Putin and Xi, so, the leaders. But the same outlets spreading fake news against India and Modi are considered as facts. This creates a hostile climate for the Indian diaspora in the West, and potentially a diplomatic crisis for India with Western governments. What could be the upcoming narratives and propaganda from Western media outlets against India? What should Western citizens be aware of when consuming such fake news with the flashy headlines?
Well, Clive. To be honest, the Western citizens have been uh, made to sleep in terms of information. They do not have much of the idea of the world outside the West. So whatever they are being fed, they just simply digest it and believe it to be true. And to our understanding, whenever I have any kind of a discussion with a Western citizen, it almost sounds like they are still into an 18th century colonial mindset. They just can't come out of it, uh, irrespective of how many realities or facts or points you put across. So this is the impact of the media narrative or the warfare which the propaganda machinery does. So to my understanding, as I've been continuously being warning a lot of non-resident Indian citizens outside, living outside, that eventually if this kind of fake news continues, there are good chances of they being attacked by racist white citizens in the Western countries, because this is an anti India narrative that these outlets run unabashedly, and there's no one even stopping them or even putting them under any kind of vigilance or a thing like that, because apparently in the West everything falls under the category of freedom. So there's no limit to what they define as freedom, which is why there are good chances of chaos happening. As you already know, the economic situation right now in the West, massive inflation because nobody is buying the treasury, the US bonds. Okay, so whatever printing of currency they do, it is the Western citizens who are going to first face the inflation, the massive wave of inflation. And a lot of Chinese exports to the West are now dwindling because Xi Jinping wants to now focus on internal cycle, which he was continuously, propagating for the last two terms, was unfortunately not able to implement. But now China is also announcing stimulus. It wants the Chinese citizens to consume the products within the country, open up the Chinese country for more trade with regional partners like India, Russia, and stuff like that. And I think the West will not be able to get cheaper exports like it used to get for so long from the Chinese. So at least for until mid 2023, I was clearly able to see that it was the Chinese supply to Mexico. In Mexico, they were putting up labels of made in Mexico and then exporting it to the US. Now, what has happened post mid 2023 is this thing has stopped to a massive level, which is why America is now focusing on building the manufacturing base within Mexico. So when we go to a multipolar world, we are going to see China plus 10 countries minimum taking up the entire load of manufacturing and splitting amongst them.
That's very interesting. We're definitely seeing that as you described, Dr. Shah. And I will say, as someone in Australia, I should comment on that, because we do have a lot of British citizens coming to Australia, and the average person is lovely. They're lovely, right? And all humans are, unless they have very bad ethics issues. Aside from that, but there is an imperial mindset, and it's quite justified. Oh, and I'll be frank. In Australia, it is most of the citizens here in Australia, though, they are very Australia oriented, and it has certainly turned during the freedom movement over the last few years to being Australian and actually sort of defending that, whereas before it was quite British. So that's a good thing. But yeah, no, I feel I have to comment because I think this is sort of sensitive but we have been seeing that in Australia, again, not to focus on Australia, but just to say with China and India, we did have a spout a few years ago where Indian students were being attacked. We have a housing crisis here, and obviously Indian students are coming, and they are saying, well, there's an immigration problem. So, what you've sort of spelled out there, yeah, it's definitely being perceived as people. as the problem when it's not. Actually, it's not the cause of the problem. These are symptoms. So, and that's not good. We don't want people like there's a gentleman that works at a supplier that I work with, and he's been there for a couple of years. An Indian guy, really nice guy, and he's become the team leader because he's excellent. His English is not great. It's gotten better, right? He's excellent, and now he's the team leader. So this is going to happen where you have people that are very motivated. So anyway, I'm going on, but I don't mean to. But at this point, let me just, because I wanted to have a little bit of interlude, and I want to show people who you are and where they can reach you. So let's just show that. So this is Dr. Shah's Twitter, X. Okay, so you can reach him here. I don't know if I should be telling the audience that or not, Dr. Shah. You're going to get all the girls messaging you now. And he's got a YouTube channel, so you can see his videos when he talks. There's a lot of interesting subjects. And I think, and you're very popular, Dr. Shah, in India. Your books. So just I wanted to show you've done quite a few books with other people.
Yeah.
If there's anything you want to, I think you mentioned this one, Geopolitics Redefined, Punctured
The
Truth
first
and
one
Glamorized.
on the top, the first one.
Oh, the first one. Yep. That's right. Yes. That
covers a lot of multipolarity and how the role of currency, the reserve currency status, and how the geopolitics revolved around it, how the narrative warfare was played all across the Indian subcontinent, how the the Western serials and TV stuff content was based on they had shows which were clearly talking about that the Middle East crude oil should be taken over by us and stuff like that. You had cartoons from the West coming in like Captain Planet and stuff like that, where you always find it's always a Western person trying to save the world and stuff like that. So this kind of soft power flexing of muscles continuously happening in media across the world. That's all the Asian countries have been subjected to. I mean, we do have our own heroes. We don't need any a Spider-Man or a Batman or a Superman to tell us. We have real heroes who fought for the independence struggle. But the narrative warfare is weaponized in such a massive way with funding by that endless printing of currency that the kids are just overwhelmed with the Western thought process and the Western construct of life. So I think over a period of time, as we move to a multipolar world, we are going to see more and more of indigenous stuff coming out. You will find people more curious to want to know about how intelligent their own ancestors were, what were their own ancestors' contribution to math, science, history, art, design, stuff like that. So I think the global South is actually opening up to itself now that it can clearly see the flaws of the Western life format. So even in terms of education, where as we know that the services sector will eventually take a big hit, you have heard the Vice President Kamala Harris clearly saying that she's going to remove the 4-year college degree requirement for the government job. Now, it is very important to understand what this means, because one of the predictions which I had given is the entire education format is going to collapse, because 400 years back, with pound as a single country reserve currency, it was the British who established the classroom format as a glorified, slavery system, human trafficking from classroom to jobs. So what is going to happen with de-dollarization eventually is what is Kamala Harris talking. She's saying that I'm going to remove the requirement of college degree for the federal jobs. Now, people need to know that the US federal government is the largest employer in the country. For those who don't know and who think that it is a capitalist nation, they need to understand this fact. It's not free market anymore. So when you say that the federal government is the largest employer, and if the largest employer is saying that I'm going to remove the requirement of college degree, it clearly points to my prediction, which is that the education sector is going to collapse with de-dollarization. There's another candidate, Mr. Trump, who is clearly saying, what is he saying? President Trump is saying there is no requirement of government jobs, and he is going to hire Elon Musk for cutting all the government expenditure. He is even going one step ahead of Kamala Harris. Okay, because
Wow.
he also understands that with 35 trillion plus of debts, the mountain of debt which the US economy is right now facing, there's no other option but to cut down on the government expenditure. So, Clive, I'm very, very apprehensive about the kind of disorder which is coming in the next 3 years. Just after the US election closes in this November, from there till November 2027, we are entering a period of chaos which the world has never seen in the last 400 years. And it's going to be a massive chaos because the services sector is going to take a massive hit with the de-dollarization process. As you can clearly understand that as countries move with bilateral trade in local currencies, what is going to happen is the Western nations will be no longer able to read the SWIFT messages. And if the Western countries cannot read the SWIFT messages, say for example, India and China are doing a bilateral trade in yuan and rupee. What happens? Say suppose we are selling rice to them and China is selling some automobile parts or cars to us. Now what will happen with the bilateral trade in local currency, which will be shifting outside the SWIFT messaging system? What happens is, now the Western countries do not know what is the contract term, what is the product, what was the pricing, and they would also not be able to make out whether the Western country should produce rice or produce an automobile part. So what we are going to see in the next 3 years is a complete collapse of the global price discovery mechanism, which the Western countries were dominating till now because they were able to read the SWIFT messages of all the countries.
That is very significant. I've seen quite a few reports, and I think it's on China Business Insider. A gentleman from the USA lives in China. He does an excellent, and I mention him because he is really good. He gets a lot of views, but he's reporting that, and he's showing the future.
I mean, in the last BRICS summit, the countries were clearly signatory to this what they call as the new online agriculture trading system. This was what was signed in the last BRICS summit.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, excellent. That does significant. He was saying too about the oil, and that they're not predicting, and this is why the price is falling, because they thought they would sell this oil, but actually the sales are occurring, like you said, between bilateral, and it's not on the SWIFT system, so they don't know, and they're producing a lot of oil thinking it's going to be sold when it isn't, so the price is going down. So these things are happening, and that's exactly. This is a big concern for the markets, for the people on Wall Street. So,
which is why it looks like because it's like you are pressing a reset button to the global financial system. So when you press the reset button, for the period that you are going to get of the next 3 years is going to be a little of disorder for everyone, including the Western markets massively.
Yeah. Well, they could do with a hit anyway. Well, look, I'll go to the next question, and I'm going to bring up a few maps as you speak on this, so people get a good visualization. So there have been reports of a recent breakthrough in China-India relations, which is great. Both the line of actual control, the LAC, the maritime borders, and a fleeting reference to the Colombo security enclave, the CSE, as well as the role of Russia in keeping these relations stable. Can you give us a view on the important development?
So, Clive, let me tell you this LAC standoff, which which is at the western section of the LAC, because these borders are not clearly demarcated, which is not agreed upon by both the nations. And we do believe that the Tibet region, which is on the other side, is actually an occupied territory by the Chinese nation. Now, what happens at the LAC is that there are patrolling points which are decided, where the Indian forces used to go up to those patrolling points and then come back to where their locations or the bases are. So this is a regular kind of which is their duty at the LAC, right, for the security purpose. Now, what happened was China one fine day came up with massive amount of forces, and actually this is in violation of the agreements which we had signed with the Chinese nation around 1990s, 93 something. So we are not supposed to amass massive forces at any one location at the LAC. Both the countries are not supposed to do it, but the Chinese did it in 2020, with which the LAC standoff started. Now, what has happened over a period of time is we had a de-escalation done. So out of the 6 points, 4 points are almost solved, which is what Jaishankar ji talks about, that 75% it's already solved. But there are two points of contention which are still pending. One is Demchok and another is called Depsang. Now, to my understanding, as much as I read geopolitics, I believe that some kind of agreement has happened, and Russia must have had a big role into increasing the understanding of both the nations. And I think they must have decided some specific date to declare that this is resolved. Okay. So in the coming days, I will not be surprised if they declare this. And I think still we have to believe that both the countries have maintained the posture and the sanity in their minds that you cannot have a full-scale war here with each other, which is why you are seeing, despite the standoff going on for more than 2 to 3 years, there's not a single bullet which is fired till now. So they would, if there is some kind of clashes which is happening, they will use cast iron and stuff like that, sticks and stuff like that. They will injure each other. They'll use stones and stuff. Some of them got killed as well. Some of them martyred in the Galwan conflict. But then still, a bullet is not yet fired. So that sanity both the sides have maintained. And I do believe that with Western currencies losing power across with the de-dollarization process, the only way forward for both the nations is to clearly demarcate their spheres of influence in the region and integrate trade with each other and people-to-people ties. So we should be able to see more and more Indian-influenced dharmic mandirs and temples coming out of China, because Xi Jinping would also want internal consumption happening, which can only happen if you revive the old cultural bonds with the Indian subcontinent. So if you are going to enjoy the festivals, if you are going to enjoy the religious practices, that's the only way internal consumption can be reignited in the Chinese nation. As you know that they have lost their birth rates with the single child policy, right? So yeah. I see a very positive going forward, but do make a note that since we have had conflict in 1962, trust is not the word that any Indian or a Chinese citizen would like to attach to the relationship. So I think the relationship between the two will go based on milestones, achievements. You complete this much, I'll complete this much. That is how the relations could be taken forward. And it's going to take a decade of healing to happen, because the memories are still there about the conflicts and how much of geography was lost and stuff like that. And still, as I said, the boundary is still not demarcated. So there are still chances of clashes happening, but I think both the big powers need to understand that they need to have this civilizational wisdom with them, and not punch each other with a full-scale war, because that would poison the population of both the countries for 2-3 more centuries, and that is not what you want to do. Eventually, you want to have people to people trade and economics established with each other, because that is how wise big powers behave.
Yeah, absolutely. And China and India, yeah, that's definitely, it's time for them. So actually, and about, if you can touch on the Colombo security enclave, if that was, yeah.
So as I told you, and as our foreign minister also talks, that first Asia has to be multipolar. So this particular security dialogue, which we have started in what we believe as the Indian subcontinent region, we want to be the net security provider from Saudi Arabia, UAE to Laos, Cambodia on the other side, because that has been our traditional ancient role. Okay, so as of now, the security dialogue covers only a few nations which are in our surrounding, but we are looking forward to a massive role in the future, and we do believe that a lot of regional governments also see India as a stabilizing factor in the region. As you already know, how we have helped nations whenever they were in crisis. And now Sri Lanka was drowned under Chinese debt, and it was us, it was our tourists and our government which bailed them out of that crisis. Similarly, Maldives as well, it was reeling under Chinese debts. It was only with the Indian financing that they are able to, be stable in terms of economics. Similarly, right now we are seeing some kind of problems that are happening in Bangladesh, with the Western interference changing the tone and texture of the government within Bangladesh, with a chief advisor who was imposed from outside. So we do believe that eventually this kind of security dialogues will tie these nations with a strong bond of defense and security with the Indian subcontinent region. And we look forward to see to it that all these small brothers also progress with India. We are here to share our prosperity with them, but in return of that, we need some kind of loyalty. We need to see to it that they also admire the Indian administration, and it can be a fair give and take between the nations in the Indian subcontinent.
Oh no, that's great. Actually, I've got another question, and this is a subject we've spoken about quite a few times, but particularly it's a little bit more controversial now, right? We've got Netanyahu where he's at the UN just recently holding up this same map. So I'll bring this up. Let's get my fingers working. So this, the IMEC, so the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Okay, so
yeah,
what about the new trade corridors, IMEC, INSTC, and the Chennai Vladivostok? Why are none of the Western media or even India media covering this?
Clive, the fact is that, as I told you, that they are so influenced with the Western mindset that they are not able to even look into the history. Now, these are not the corridors which are new. Actually, these are ancient Bharat corridors. Okay. Now, because most of the time when you see the Western media, they will always talk about pitting neighbors against each other. They will make headlines about India growth, China growth. They will talk about India growth, Bangladesh growth. They will talk about India growth, Nepal growth, India growth, Sri Lanka growth. One fine day, I was so angry about it. I tweeted to one of the Western intellectual. I told him, why don't you focus on your growth rates? You don't have any growth rates. Why don't you discuss that?
Good point.
So
yeah, exactly.
They are always spreading, headlines to pit neighbors against each other, and that too only Asian neighbors. Why not check out Canada does not have any growth rate, US does not have any growth rate. How are your economy going to survive? Why don't you talk about that? Your country is how aged, you have a mountain of debt on your head. Talk about that. Why don't you talk that? Okay. So I think this just pisses me off, because they are always comparing one nation, one Asian nation with the other, and pitting them against each other in all their media headlines. Now, they will always talk about, what they call as, in the Indian subcontinent, they will talk about the Silk Route. Now, Silk Route, certainly one of the ancient Bharat routes where India was also connected, but it was mainly a pro-China or a more of a pro-China trade kind of a thing, where China was one of the important pointers. Now, there were trade routes, which is right now, as we are seeing, the IMEC trade route, which goes from UAE through Saudi Arabia till Haifa, and then to the Greece and Italian ports. Now, this is one of the ancient. The other one that we have is the INSTC, which goes from Iran to Russia. Okay. And the third one is Chennai Vladivostok corridor. These are the three corridors of the future in terms of trade. Okay. This is where majority of the world trade is going to happen. You got to understand this, because the Western currencies, as I said, are going to lose the purchasing power. So the regional integration of trade is the only way forward. Okay. Now, if this IMEC corridor has to operate, which goes from Gujarat and Mumbai ports, Maharashtra ports, to UAE, where I believe Dubai will become the global warehouse of Indian goods, across Saudi Arabia, which is the ancient trade route from where the Indian incense sticks and the stuff which was used for worship at the Temple Mount in Israel was supplied from India. So this route connects the Haifa port of Israel, from there to Greece, and then to Italy. This is going to be the most important trade route of the world. Why I'm saying this? Because Indian Ocean is the only peaceful ocean from where 90% of the raw materials, resources, oil, gas, stuff flows. Okay, which is why it is very, very critical. In fact, the whole human history is just about the Indian Ocean, because 400 years back, when the Europeans came searching for us, they came searching for us because of these trade routes. They wanted to know which country is so rich that it is giving 27 to 33% to the global GDP all alone. Okay, that is why they came searching for us. They conquered the important islands, the port cities, the entry and exit points of both the waters of India and China. They got us subdued. They took the raw materials from us, produced finished goods in 18th century industrialization in Europe, and sold goods back here with colonization, which is why India and China, which were giving more than 50% to the world GDP, came down to 5%. This is what they did. So it clearly outlines that the whole world economy is run by the Indian Ocean, right? So, which is why these three trade routes are so important. And India is just out in those waters. That's the positive that we have. Now, what happens eventually is we are looking at this particular corridor as an important corridor of trade. And if this has to function, a massive de-radicalization process has to happen. Now, we all know that it was the petrodollar which funded the radicalization process in the West Asian region and the Indian subcontinent. So when we go towards de-dollarization and de-radicalization, the petrodollar agreement is obviously going to collapse. So the oil for security program, which was signed with Saudi Arabia, is now going to reverse, okay, which we are already seeing. Whether it's officially declared or not, Saudi Arabia has started trading crude oil in yuan with the Chinese country. The UAE has started trading crude oil in Indian rupees with India. So that agreement is gone.
Right. Okay. Well, I've got a last question, and then I want to open the floor to you to address the public. With, if there's something that you want to say to the public, I want to give this opportunity to our guests now, where they get to say if there's something on their mind or something new, there can be some innovation, etc. But this last question, we got about a bit less than 10 minutes. We want to try and get under an hour. But what can you say to the citizens of BRICS nations and non-BRICS nations too, Dr. Shah, on the need to watch out against fake media narratives?
Well, a lot of my suggestion to the viewers is that if you want to save yourself from fake narratives, uh, the first step that you need to take is, if you see similar kind of headlines across media with similar kind of words, that should be the first pointer warning that this is simply cut, copy, pasted. Okay, so you need to re-verify with official announcements from the government. Like, suppose I'm supposed to cite an example. Last year, when the BRICS summit was there, the entire media declared that the Prime Minister is not going to visit the BRICS summit this time in Africa. And I was the only one who was saying that this is fake. Okay. And then we also, after a lot of pressure coming from this fake media, what the government had to do is it had to come out and clearly say that the Prime Minister is going. Okay. So what we saw in that BRICS summit was the Chandrayaan landing, which happened, right? And all the BRICS nations members celebrated India's achievement on that day, right? So we got to understand that when you see similar kind of words used in headlines, it is simply cut, copy, pasted. Second thing, since the Western agencies and vested interest have a higher possibility of influencing the headlines, if their media and your media is talking similar things, then you need to double check before believing it to be true. You can safely assume that it could be false. Like last month itself, they were killing Xi Jinping. They were saying Xi Jinping is missing. Then they were saying maybe he got some stroke. Then they said that maybe some fracture. Okay. And none of that, actually happened. So you need to be very alert about, and even about President Putin. They talk multiple things about President Putin as well, none of which came true. In fact, when the Ukraine war started, they said President Putin will be gone. They said coup will happen, which did not happen. Okay, even in the Prigozhin episode, it was completely fake. I said on that very same day in the morning itself that this is not a coup. Nobody comes for a coup 1,000 kilometers declaring that I'm doing a coup. It is really hilarious. Okay, that is not how coups happen. Okay, but the fake media has to just simply cut, copy, paste things. Okay.
Yeah, they're not original. They're definitely getting their orders from Central Command. So no, that's good. So I did have another question, but I want to give you at least 5 minutes. If you don't have anything to say, that's fine. But no, so
I'll just add 2 more sentences.
Please.
The kind of world that we are going to enter the next 3 years, my suggestions to people is focus on a self-employment and entrepreneurship model, focus on homeschooling, focus on sectors other than the services sector, focus on working in areas which are not dependent for revenue on Western payments. Okay. Focus on sectors like farming, manufacturing, food processing, logistics, mining, precious metals, space and defense. Because in multipolar world, each regional power will require its own fully functioning economy and fully functioning military. Because the Western countries will not be able to do the global policing of 800 bases and stuff like that, like they used to do before. Okay. Which means you will have to focus on your own space and defense sectors. Okay. So the more self-dependent that you become on critical technologies, critical minerals, the better for your nation, and enter into more and more bilateral free trade agreements. I mean, the governments need to enter into that, because when this crisis period will come, many of the multilateral understanding are going to collapse. So countries are going to behave the way they like. So the more your government has bilateral free trade agreement signed, the better your chance of getting supplies during crisis from other countries.
That's really good advice. I hope representatives of countries are watching this video. And, you know, the audience, please share it so they do. Dr. Shah is pretty famous, but he still needs you to spread and help. So, but thank you very much, Dr. Shah. We're going to end it there, and I'll just do a send-off. Namaste. Thank you very much.
Jai Hind.
If you've enjoyed this episode and wish to join the conversation, you can comment below. Please like and share this episode to spread it as far as possible. We're putting together a plan to bring you right into the middle of the Kisan Summit, and with Dr. Shah as well, hopefully. We want you to be more than just spectators. We want you to be part of the action. We're funding this ourselves, so if you want to support our efforts, you can do so with a super thanks through donations on our Buy Me a Coffee page, or just by spreading the video around to your network. Any contribution you can make is appreciated. Thank you for tuning into BRICS Briefs. Don't forget you can follow us on our Substack and other social media platforms, especially our Telegram channel, for daily news on BRICS, all linked below. Stay curious, stay connected, stay optimistic, and let's keep exploring together. Alvida.